I will introduce our speaker. It is Matt Grubesich. Matt has been a Rowlett citizen since 2004, I believe. He's been on our city council since 2017. He is also the director of Parks and Recreation at the City of Garland. And so is very well qualified to speak on this topic, connecting with nature. Matt, I will turn it over to you if you have any other opening statements about yourself. Otherwise, let me know if you have issues with the presentation, because I do also have it pulled up. It is totally up to you.
Thank you, Connor, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking some time out of your Saturday to join us here today. I hope you're getting some good information. I have a tremendous amount of information to go through, so I think Connor did a pretty good job of giving me my background, but I will have my contact information at the end, and so if you would like to go ask me any questions or find out more about what my background is, I'd be happy to help you, but I only have 25 minutes and about 3 different presentations that I jammed into one to share with you. So we're going to go ahead and get going and move. So I was asked to speak today about, what the role green space and nature brings to neighborhoods. And so what I wanted to start with was just some really quick population data. We just got done with the new census data that is starting to come out, and there's some pretty interesting data that came from that, as I'm sure most of you can guess that are.
I was kicked out again.
Yeah, I was kicked out again too. Let's join neighborhood.
It happened to us again, Connor. You're on. Connor, am I back on?
Awesome.
We good?
You guys hear me now?
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good. Sorry, Matt. Go ahead and give
at the last talk.
Yeah, it seems Zoom wants us all to enjoy the main room, but we all want to be in the breakout rooms. So.
Sounds good.
Go ahead and keep pushing on.
Sounds good. So wanted to start with some population numbers, and it's like I don't think it's probably news to anybody that's listening that Texas once again showed the highest percentage of growth of any state out there. And what's really interesting, though, is that we actually had several counties that actually lost population over the last 10 years. But we see that our major metropolitan areas gained population at a very, very quick rate. And the estimate is by 2050, 2 out of every 3 people will live in cities. And this continues to be a trend even here in Texas, where you start looking at the individual counties. 5 of the top fastest growing counties in Texas, in the fastest growing state, are right here in the DFW area. So I think where this is going is we need to rethink when we think of neighborhoods, we need to think about what our cities look like, because as we continue to grow and as our population continues to grow, our neighborhoods and our cities are really connected. So as our cities go, so go our neighborhoods. And you look at where these people are coming from, and you really start to break down where that population change is coming from. Obviously, the biggest net increase that we're seeing is from natural increase. So that's births and things like that. Probably if I would have asked you this question before showing you this slide, you probably would have said migration is a big one. And though migration does make up a little over 20% of our population increase, it's actually decreased over the last 10 years than it did the year before that. And actually one of our bigger growths over the last 10 years has been from our net domestic migration. And you can probably guess, we've probably all seen the license plates in terms of which states we're seeing that domestic migration from states like California, New York, Illinois, some of those larger metropolitan areas that have actually decreased in population over the last 10 years, where we've seen a huge increase in population. But when you break that down even further and you start looking at the population pyramid and the age of the population that is moving here, you start to see some pretty interesting millennials and the Generation Zs operate in a different way than our Gen Xers and our baby boomers and older generations are doing. And when you look at how they operate and how they function in a more technological world, is they aren't having kids as much. And this is a very interesting chart when you look at this and you look at the bottom of the pyramid and you start to see that it indents here. It means that our millennials and our Gen Zs aren't repopulating as quickly as some of our older generations are. And so when you look at that in terms of what the future for our region is, you can start to draw some conclusions. But also looking at what millennials and Gen Zs are, is they don't hold the same things. What they want to do is not always what the older communities wanted to do. It's not about starting a family and moving and buying a home and starting a community. A lot of them, if you ask them, they don't want to rent cars. In the Uber world that we live in today, they're more connected. Which means that all of this is how do we look at neighborhoods and what's our neighborhood of the future going to look like? Because we're going to continue to grow. You can look at what the population projections are through 2050, and you can see the two biggest counties in our region, Dallas and Tarrant, are going to continue to grow, but then our counties to the north and even to our south are going to grow at an exponential rate. And so, we all have a thought of what our typical neighborhood looks like, but I think what we need to really start paying attention to is what is our neighborhood of the future going to look like, and how are our cities of the future going to look, and how do we make sure that they're resilient and sustainable. And one of the big issues, one of the big things that we need to consider is that attachment to nature, and not losing that attachment to nature, and bringing green space, and making sure that as we become more dense and as we become more populated, that we don't lose that green space. And why is that? Well, we live in a world that is in a major dilemma. We're in what we call a nature deficit disorder. And you may have heard that term that was coined by Richard Louv in his book, Last Child in the Woods. But this is a real thing that is now being documented scientifically through lots of different studies. As we become a more technology-centered world, we actually become less connected with the people around us. And that has lasting impacts. So when we look at our youth, average 8 hours a day on electronics, teens up to 12 hours, that leads to issues like obesity. It leads to things like vitamin D deficiency from just literally not being outside. 50% of our preschoolers have been never taken outside to play by their parents. Denied access to nature, maybe because they're afraid of it or because they don't have access to it in terms of an equity issue. We look at ADHD disorders that have gone up in our schools, and there's become an inherent fear of just being outside. And so these are all issues that we face on a day-to-day basis. I know even in my house, as we have a basket where the phones get turned into every night because it becomes an issue. And you can notice when a kid's been on a phone for 8 hours a day that their personality changes. And it's not just kids, it's adults too. And we're in an ever so connected world where we hold these things up, and they're a great tool, but actually they've had an adverse effect to us in causing us to be unconnected. And that's really what the benefits of neighborhoods can be, is getting outside and getting to know your neighborhoods and getting to know your community. And when you have communities that are built that way and centered that way, they're safer communities, they're more vibrant communities, and that's where people want to live. This disengagement with the natural environment just doesn't affect our kids, but we've seen a 44% increase in anxiety disorders across our country. We've seen we've seen an increase in depression. We've seen a decrease in immune system functionality. And I want to focus on health because it's, I think, really, really important, especially in the world we live today, coming out of, or if you want to say coming out of a pandemic for the last 2 years. We've never been more in touch with health and what can our immune system and how we can function and how we can better, get ourselves to be able to handle things like the flu and other types of diseases and things that are out there. And what we've also seen is, when you're stuck inside for a year, getting outside becomes really, really important. I know during the midst of that pandemic, I saw more people in my neighborhood and met more people in my neighborhood just because they were outside walking. So how do we transition that into our parks and our neighborhoods things get back to a relatively normal, where we're busy again and more likely not to do that. So really of the future is where do you want to live? And this is important for economic development. It's important for public health and safety. It's important for education of how we design our cities and how we design our neighborhoods of the future, of how our cities are going to go and how we're going to go as a region. So do you want to sit in the miles and miles of traffic or have more green space? Do you want to go shopping in a strip mall that has no greenery, or are you going to go shopping in an area that has nice landscape and is connection to nature? What type of parking lots do we want? How are they going to function? You know, how do we better utilize landscape in our natural environment so that it works, the landscaping works with the infrastructure and not against it? What type of neighborhood do you want to live in? And these are all rhetorical questions, of course, because I think we all intuitively know where you would rather go, right? We all know where you would rather go shopping. We all know what type of city or neighborhood that you would rather live in. But as we build and we continue to expand, we have to look at making sure that things don't get value engineered out. And when you look at projects that come out, value engineering becomes a four-letter word, in my opinion, because usually the green space, the landscaping, the nature gets value engineered out for short-term cost recovery gains. And I'm telling you that that can't happen anymore, because it's costing us in the long run. When you look at health expenditure costs in our country, they're quite exorbitant. We spend more in this country on healthcare than we do on national defense, and that's pretty insane. We spend more per person than any other country in the world. On average, healthcare expenditures per person are almost $8,500 a year. And if you look at that in connection in terms of what the average US spends on parks, which is $83 on an average, but in Texas and even in the DFW area, that average is actually closer to $47 per person. So you can see that we're talking 100 more times spending that we do to treat a lot of these issues that are out there, that research is starting to show that just a healthy dose of green can actually go a long ways in being able to mitigate a lot of those health issues that we have. We've literally built ourselves into a health emergency in this country in terms of how our cities have been built. And we have a real opportunity as we continue to grow to make sure that we're building neighborhoods and cities that bring nature back into it, to make sure that they're healthy and that we can have good connectivity and healthy people as we continue to grow. So estimated return for urban greening is just some real quick stats that in terms of reduced cardiovascular disease, reduction of ADHD, newborn health, and from air pollution and things like that go down when you have excess greening. But it really goes beyond this, is that as you increase green, you decrease health effects. And so what that means is, and what it shows is, by people that just sit around, that have access to nature, actually your bodies produce serotonin, and that serotonin is part of what can not only give you a sense of well-being and health, but also has a physical effect on our bodies by making us healthy. If you've ever heard of the word Shinrin Yoku, it's actually a Japanese practice called forest bathing. And it's actually, in parts of Asia, it's actually prescribed to help reduce anxiety, to help reduce stress, where you actually are prescribed to go walk around in nature for a little while. Because what we see is as we increase tree canopy cover, as we increase exposure to nature in our communities, what we see is increasing property values in our neighborhoods. We see an increased protection from things like flooding, which I'll go into a little bit more. We see a decrease in the urban heat island effect in terms of cooling effects. Cities that have tree canopy cover that are over 30% actually can be as much as 15 degrees cooler than areas that have tree canopy cover less than 30%. You combine that then with energy savings costs, the numbers really go up pretty quickly. You see reduced stress levels. You see reduced obesity because people are more prone to get outside. You see reduced stress. Because people don't realize is that, you know, just like our bodies need rest, our brains need rest as well. And when we live in a world where it's a 24-hour news cycle and you're on your phone and all of the time, your brain never actually gets a chance to relax and to recover. And actually Harvard has done a study that just talks about focusing on the unfocused. And it's about mental health and about how we need to be able to give our brains a break during the day and what the benefits that are. And by just going outside and spending time in nature, it lets that part of your brain actually rest. And by doing that, the mental benefits that come from it and an increasing time of mental stress is really, really important. And it's really important to how we build healthy neighborhoods and healthy communities as we move forward. There's a really great study. It was done by Robert Ulrich, and a lot of you may have heard about, where they actually did a study with hospital patients, and they took patients recovering from surgery, and they put some in a room that overlooked a parking lot and some in a room that overlooked green space. And what they found was that those patients that recovered in the rooms overlooking green space actually recovered quicker. They had less post-operative problems, and they used less medication. This has become such a trend that they've even expanded that research and show that it can even be just a picture of nature. And so this has really been indoctrinated in terms of how hospitals are built and how recovering rooms are built, and green space that in the landscaping that goes in and around hospitals, and the core that goes into rooms, because you know, hospitals are about making money too. And so if they can get patients in and get them better quicker and use less medication to it, then, you know, they can treat more people. And so, you know, these types of scientific researchers are starting to have in how we treat people on a day-to-day basis. So I also wanted to touch pretty quickly on green space. So we talked about the health benefits and why we want to bring more nature into our communities, but we also and we look at how we look at cities with our population growth. And another thing that we really need to make sure we look at is we look at infrastructure. As we continue to grow, and especially with the new infrastructure package that just came through Congress, with a lot of money that's going to be going towards our infrastructure in the future. And when you look at our infrastructure as a whole nationwide, that really is performing pretty poorly. When you look at what our infrastructure needs are across the U.S., rated by the American Society of Civil Engineers, you know, there's about $3.6 trillion that is needed to bring our infrastructure up to par. And so we can look at this as two different ways. You know, you can look at it as, yes, it's a problem that we have to do, but it can also be looked at as an opportunity. And so if as we are rebuilding our infrastructure, and as we build new infrastructure, as we continue to grow, as we all will continue to grow, when you look at the population numbers, it's very, very important that we don't, again, value engineer out those natural abilities to be able to increase and improve our infrastructure within our cities. And again, it's really easy for us to be able to value engineer those out, but there's some really great examples out there of how this stuff can be used. So by increasing impervious areas through our right-of-way systems and our roads, as those are being redone, as we look at how we utilize green space in our neighborhoods, as we look at using infrastructure in our streets to be able to handle and maintain stormwater and use it as an economic development tool, the results can be pretty astounding for the results that we can get for it. And so just a couple of really kind of quick stories. If you've never been to Bagby Street in Houston, this is a prime example of how you can use infrastructure as stormwater management. So they collect almost 350 million gallons of stormwater through the engineering that was done when they redid this street. And what they found was a reinvestment of $55 million along this corridor, a 22% increase in lease rates. And it was also the only street in this sector of town and near downtown Houston that didn't flood during Hurricane Harvey, which is pretty remarkable. Cherry Creek North in Denver saw a 16% increase in sales tax. They more than doubled the rate of increase for both the city and the entire Denver metro area. These in major metro areas that heavily invested in green. Miami, 85% total increase in assessed value, 1.5 million increase property value in uptown streetscape in Normal, Illinois. And the one that I didn't put on here, which is I think a really great example, is Clyde Warren Park in downtown Dallas. When Clyde Warren Park was first proposed, everybody thought they were crazy. And it was a huge investment. It was a lot of money. Nobody thought it would work. And now when you look at downtown, that's the most expensive real estate. That's where you see the highest rental rates. That's where you see the highest rental costs for commercial spaces. It's where you've seen the bulk of the growth happen downtown. And it's been so successful that now cities all across the country are looking how you put deck parks in so that you can turn what was just space to move cars into usable green space. And they weren't doing it for the environmental factor. They're doing it for the economic factor, as well as the economic growth benefits. So bringing nature back to our communities is something that needs to be planned and needs to be part of our planning process as we continue to redevelop and build out our cities. And what is kind of it's not a new word if you've been in this business, but if you're not in this business, biophilic is something that you're going to see more and more. And it's essentially, it's the effect that our biology and that nature has on our physical world and our physical being. And there's a trend out there now that's called the Biophilic Cities. And it's how we design cities to be more in tune with nature for the health benefits, the economic benefits, the benefits for our society as a whole moving forward. And there's a real push by upcoming city planners, landscape architects, those that are going to be city leaders, city planners that are going to be making decisions for our cities of the future and our neighborhoods of the future to incorporate biophilic design properties into it for our overall well-being. And so I went over that. I went through a lot of stuff really fast because I really wanted to show this video, and it's a little bit longer than I would normally show in a presentation of this time, but it's also a really great video that I think kind of wraps up very concisely everything that I've been talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and show it, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
About 2010, people were starting to have interest in what we were doing here at Serenbe. You know, it had gone from this crazy idea.
Can you not see
That we can, no, we cannot see it.
To, hey, something was going on here. And everyone was wanting to put a tag on. And so
Hold on.
so I was searching, who are we? And realized that biophilia was really the tag, because that connects all living systems. And that's what we're really doing here. And so then we formed the Biophilic Institute, primarily to—
That we still can't see that, I don't believe.
Group that comes together, especially with a focus on—
You say you still can't see it?
I cannot, at least. You might need to reshare and then do your desktop as opposed to the app, because it might be just stuck on perhaps your PowerPoint.
Can you see it now?
About 2000.
Yep, there it
People were
is.
starting to have interest in what we were doing here at Serenity. You know, it had gone from this crazy idea of creating a village in the woods to, hey, something was going on here. And everyone was wanting to put a tag on it. And so I was searching, who are we? And realized that Biophilic was really the tag, because that connects all living systems. And that's what we're really doing here. And so then we formed the Biophilic Institute, primarily to be a thought leadership group that comes together, especially with a focus on policymakers and educators. And so then talking with Tim Beatley of Biophilic Cities, we decided. So the idea of this is to discuss among those people that are making the difference or have a potential to make a difference as to what they're doing and how it can connect the dots in other cities and other places.
I'm an urban planner, and I come at things from the point of view of looking at cities. And of course, we're in the midst of this remarkable global transformation and becoming profoundly more urban. And so with Biophilic Cities, what we believe is that nature needs to be at the core. It has to be at the center of design and planning. There are roles for everyone to play in this agenda, and that's what's interesting about this Serenity conference, that we've got architects and designers, but we've got poets and writers, and we've got community activists, we've got citizens just sort of figuring out what this means to them in daily life or what it means for their neighborhood or their building. So this is a really important meeting for energizing and getting inspired and kind of moving the agenda forward.
Human beings actually need nature, that it's not just an amenity, that it's actually a necessity. Now I think the challenge is really how to provide that access for everyone. So I think we face a lot of social inequities, we face a lot of racial inequities and social justice issues. You could argue we are a little bit broken today. We are disconnected from the natural environment. Many of us are facing a lot of problems of modern life having to do with obesity, inactivity, diabetes, depression, anxiety, and on and on. And I think you could argue that a lot of those are diseases of the indoors. So I argue that we are living in the middle of the largest mass migration in human history. And it's the migration indoors. And yet we're not discussing it as much as we need to be.
Biophily really is the human connection to nature. And what we're interested in is how do those experiences of nature impact people psychologically and physiologically, and then translate those into the built environment. Through our research of looking at different impacts and different experiences of nature, we developed a series of components or elements that we call a pattern language, 14 patterns of biophilic design, that are different ways you can experience nature in the built environment. Some of them are very direct, like seeing nature out your window, bringing plants, animals, water inside the building. So those are direct experiences of nature. Indirect experiences of nature are using natural materials, using forms and patterns that you find in nature in furniture and artwork and fabrics and all of that. And then finally, there are different spatial experiences that are really important when we're out in nature that elicit very strong responses. The ability to have a distant view, prospect. The ability to be in a place where my back is protected, which is called refuge. The intriguing thing that we're learning about the biophilic responses is that they are not necessarily way faster than conscious thought processing. And so this is where the whole science around what's called affordances and the way the brain responds to spaces and objects occurs. And so translating that into saying, okay, so based on that science, what does that tell us about the spaces we need to be creating to help people? And what we're really looking for is, can I do design that helps lower stress, that improves cognitive function, that improves people's mood, that makes for better well-being in the built environment?
I think the point of life, if you look throughout many wisdom traditions and philosophers, has always been to pursue and find a form of happiness. And when you look at the literature on happiness, it's not just about feeling good. It's about functioning well, and functioning well with a sense of purpose, belonging, that you're contributing things to your community, that you're confident to think and express your ideas and opinions, that you're accepting of yourself, but accepting of others. That version of happiness, I think, is rather rich in some reclaim, because I think when you hear the word happiness or flourishing, you think immediately about the smile and the feeling, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't put that together with a life where you have purpose and belonging and contribution, you're not flourishing. And all of our studies show you need that combination to lead a better life and to prevent mental disorders, among other problems. The rewards go to the curious. And nature and biophilia is just the most amazing place that just trains you to sort of be curious.
We used to be very connected to nature. We depended upon nature, and we still do, but we've forgotten that. And it's why, for instance, in the city of Atlanta, we're so excited to see a renewed focus on how nature is integrated into an urban and suburban environment, and why it's so necessary to pay attention to that and to taken on this urban ecological framework analysis. And so the city of Atlanta is saying, this is really important for us. It's part of our DNA, and we need to make sure that we embrace that and then figure out how to really value that going forward. We recognize that this is a real opportune moment to really start using this field to create a better environment for all of us.
Atlanta has so many good examples. If you look at the stormwater at Fourth Ward Park above Ponce City Market, that's transitioned to what would have been an underground stormwater to an exposed bioretention, and now it's a public asset. So that's an example on how all cities can really use their stormwater infrastructure as a positive way to connect people to nature. The Beltline is a wonderful example of how just looking at an asset that's been there for years but abandoned, and that brings it together. The restoration of Proctor Creek now, Chattahoochee River, a tremendous opportunity. So if we think about stormwater, how raindrops hit each house and each business, they have to find a route to our local streams and rivers. And if we started thinking about daylighting those areas, we would certainly have a network of green space throughout our metro areas. So I think our urban cities are just such a rich opportunity because some of that infrastructure is crumbling and we're going to have to redo it. Let's do it in a biophilic manner that really changes people's lives.
Life's too short to be creating spaces that impact you poorly psychologically and physiologically, right? It costs the same. So let's create spaces that make people happy and healthy and productive and reduce stress and improve cognitive performance and just make life better. As we're moving to a world where 70% of the people live in urban areas, this is a really important issue.
Here's the thing, we can adapt to so many circumstances, comforting and joyful and embracing, but that's not a life worth living, in my opinion. So I think it's worthy of bringing nature into our urban lives.
We have a need for beauty, and we're learning actually more and more about the science of awe. Awe is a positive emotion that has been very understudied, and yet we know when we experience something sort of overwhelmingly beautiful, something that stops us in our tracks and surprises us in a way. So I'm fascinated by awe. I think it's something we don't think about very much in our lives, but it turns out that half the time that we experience awe, it comes from the natural world.
Go back to this real quick. All right. So thank you guys for bearing with me there for that. I'm going to share back to the presentation real quick. Go back to the presentation mode. Oh, shoot. Let me get to the end. So that was a good synopsis. And so what I think is really important, and what I really liked about that one of the things that really hit home to me with that is a mass migration indoors. And I think she is 100% correct. We're more and more prone to be inside than we are outside. And I think that Pascal Mitchell with the Nature Conservancy sums it up best, where the great city of the future is an ecological and economically resilient, and it's made up of healthy, livable neighborhoods where the benefits of nature are available to all people. And that we need to, as leaders in our communities, make sure that we strive to include nature in everything that we do. As with that, hopefully we all can live should all strive to live in a community and to develop a community that is connected to nature. So thank you guys for your time, and be happy to answer any questions. And below is both of my emails. So feel free, if you want to email me at my Rowlett account or at my City of Garland account. Either way, you can get a hold of me. So thank you very much, and I'll answer any questions that you guys have.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I love that. I had just a kind of a procedural question from Nancy in regards to the name of the video. Nancy, all of the material, including all the presentations, will be available on our website following the meeting. So that will certainly be that link. That whole link will be in that there. I do have a question first from Jan Alexander. It reads, COVID has had such a tremendous effect on our global affairs, and I can attest that nature helped me throughout. So that's just a great comment from Jan in regards to the benefits of that natural environment. I've got a question from Scott that reads, for suburbs, does Matt, you being the speaker, do you see more benefit in large amenity-rich green spaces like Clyde Warren, or more to the current model of spreading out resources across dozens of neighborhood parks? Matt, could you speak to that in a little bit of time that we have?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it needs to be a little bit of both. And I think as we develop, we have a great development in Rowlett that really has incorporated green space into their development, so that front homes are facing green space and using our form-based code to be able to do it. And it's the people that live there just rave about it, and the ability to be able to go outside and walk and interact with their neighbors. So I think we need to develop our neighborhoods with that connection to green space. Light Farms Ranch up in Salina is another great example that has done that. But we also need our large gathering spaces. We need spaces for communities to be able to come together and interact as a whole as well. And that can be where you can really have multi-use developments thrive around those types of areas. So we need both.
Awesome, thank you. And I don't see any other follow-up questions. I did have one, perhaps a little bit of a takeaway as well. My position with the city is from a code enforcement somewhat type of role. And Matt, obviously you're one of our councilmen. What is a tool that citizens can have to try and push maybe some of this initiative if there are not individuals in the city or on city council that would have that prerogative? Do you have any advice to individuals that feel passionately in their own communities, if they're joining us from different communities other than our own, to sort of push that initiative?
Yeah.
Any advice that you could give to them?
My advice to anybody like that is to get involved. Find a local nonprofit like Keep Rowlett Beautiful, or Keep Garland Beautiful, or Keep Plano Beautiful. Plano's got some great environmental resources out there as well as Rowlett and Garland. Get involved with your neighborhood. Get involved with the city. There's ways that you can serve, like on planning and zoning. Get involved when your form-based codes are being reviewed. Get involved when your city comp plans are being done, because that's when those those are forward-thinking programs and plans that are put out by the city that drive decision making long into the future. And so getting involved in those types of reviews and plans when your cities are doing them will go a long ways in the decisions that are made later on.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Well, with that kind of puts us right at the end of our second session. So from here, I'll send everybody back